And the sole purpose of Buddha appearing in this world system is to bring us to liberation. So the purpose of refuge is for the purpose of liberation, pure refuge. And so we can just take a moment to reflect on what we've done so far. And even right from the first module of DB, Mind and Its Potential, one of the key things we recognized back then is how the ultimate nature of our mind, the lack of inherent existence, is no different to the nature of a Buddha's mind, also lacking inherent existence. Because the mind lacks inherent existence means it can be developed, can be transformed. We can grow all the qualities of a Buddha's holy mind, the consummate love, wisdom, ability, knowing exactly how to benefit sentient beings in each moment, effortlessly and spontaneously, in accord with their disposition. But if we are to do that, we need to rely on somebody who has realized the ultimate nature of their own mind, possesses the qualities that we seek, can compassionately guide us, show us how to develop the same path, and inspire us to study, practice, meditate, where the real transformation will begin. And so right now we have the best basis, this precious human rebirth, to ripen this Buddha nature. We have all the inner conditions and outer conditions right at our disposal. We have all the freedoms and opportunities. And all of these are results that we've created the cause for in the past. Abiding in ethics, practice of generosity, 6 perfections, and making stainless aspirational prayers to connect that virtue to a precious human rebirth. So we've worked very hard to get these conditions right now. But we must not take it for granted, because death could come even today. We could lose these very conditions we enjoy right now. And we also need to recognize that not only is death certain and the time of death uncertain, but because at death our mind continues, all of the virtues we've created, the virtues and the negativities, all these seeds will accompany us on our journey to next life. What that next life will be is not a choice. It is beyond our control. It is simply the ripening of past actions, karma, past karma actions. And so at death, there's only 2 ways we could go: fortunate realms, like a human, or unfortunate realms, miserable realms like an animal, and so forth. And if we were to take rebirth in the unfortunate realms, we would be without refuge, without any support or protection. We wouldn't have the intelligence we possess as humans to know, distinguish virtue from non-virtue, what are causes for happiness, what are causes for suffering. And so while we have all these present conditions, we must take refuge. We say in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the Buddha, the teacher of refuge, the Dharma, the actual refuge, the actual protection. When we embody the Dharma in our own mind, creating masses of virtue, purifying as much negativity as we can so it doesn't ripen, and refraining from creating new negativities. With refuge, we stop being reckless. We guard our karma, actions and results. We make sure that we transform our minds into healthy minds, virtuous minds, constructive minds. And we can share these stages of the path of the small scope. We can share them with bodhicitta motivation. So aiming for a great scope, but also sharing the stages of the path with the small and medium scope. And so we can think our situation is no different to any other living being, just like me. We all wish for happiness. And just like me, we all suffer. And so we can go for refuge relying on Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to create the causes and protection we need to not only free ourselves from suffering, but to be able to free all living beings from all suffering forever and bring them to enlightenment. So our mind becomes completely wide open and vast, incorporating love and compassion and great compassion, bodhicitta, for all living beings, without division, friend, enemy, stranger, but having an affection for each and every one of them as the causes of our happiness. In dependence on others, we can create this virtue we endeavor to create. And so if you like, you can join me in going for refuge. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. And so we can see where we've come from. We've looked at the Buddha's life story and how it related very much to our own story, and seeing the similarities of like a Buddha's life prior to setting out on the path, and also, this ultimate nature of our mind being the same and so forth. We've looked at the four greatnesses, how the teachings are without contradiction. They are for one particular person's journey at a particular time. So if we see that things are inherently existing and then another time the teachings say they lack inherent existence, we can see that they're without contradiction, because to train somebody at a particular point in time, they needed to hold on to a particular substantial type of self to create virtuous karma and so forth. And like this is just one example. So applied at different times based on an individual's journey to enlightenment. So advice for one, we know this in our everyday, advice for one is not advice for all. It's catered to a particular illness or disposition and so forth. So that was one of the greatnesses. We also looked at taking the teachings as personal advice or personal instructions. And another one was about easily finding the intention, which is the essence of what the Buddha is teaching us, which is these three principal aspects of the path, which we'll look at in subsequent weeks in more detail. And how by understanding these greatnesses, we can be protected from creating great negativities, like abandoning the Dharma, thinking, oh, the Mahayana is so much more important and the lesser vehicle, we don't need this. We don't need to practice the small and medium scopes. We know this is utterly wrong, and we know that they're all the teachings of the Buddha, and so we cannot disparage any set of teachings, but need to rely on all of them. If we're going to get to the highest level of a ladder, we need to proceed gradually through the earlier stages. We cannot discard the Dharma. So this is in essence some of the revision. And also, if we are going to adopt the mindset of a bodhisattva, then we need to train all sentient beings according to their dispositions. And so therefore we need to know all paths to be able to help all living beings without exception. So a way of listening to the teachings, remember being on Zoom is very difficult because it brings up so many more distractions, whether it be our phones or, animals and so forth that we want to love and care for, and, all of that. But see it all as distractions for now, and try to keep your focus very clear. And so listen well. Don't just blindly accept something to be true, but go, when we finish, check it up, investigate, analysis, generate questions, and so forth. And not only listen well, but listen in the best way so that we take the instructions as that, personal instructions, personal advice. What we hear is what we put into practice. These are not separated. And then to retain what you can of what we're learning. So whether it be taking screenshots or whether it be taking notes or both, this would be very good. We looked at Lamratisha, how he created when he was in Tibet for those like maybe 20 years. It was in the 11th century, towards the end of his life. And he created the 84,000 teachings into a beautiful framework known as the Lam Rim, the graduated stages of the path to enlightenment. And so he compiled all of those teachings into one text, and that text is called Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And it is that on which we all rely. In all Buddhist traditions, we rely on that as our chief Lamrim text. And so we looked at the various aspects in the small scope. We looked at how, all the stages of the small scope, including how death is certain, the time of death is uncertain, and only spiritual practice will help us at the time of death. So, we need to take this opportunity that we have now. And for all the reasons I gave in the initial motivation, which was a bit of revision of the small scope, and how whatever negativities we've created, we don't need to go to the lower realms. We can purify all those negativities without delay by incorporating the four opponent powers. And we looked at that last week as well. Regret, reliance, which incorporates refuge, bodhicitta, remedy, some sort of Dharma action, to counteract the non-virtue with some sort of virtuous action, reciting the Heart Sutra or meditating on emptiness bodhicitta or making satsas and vajrasattva. So many things we can do. And then the most important is restraining and resolving not to do the action again. Dependent on the level of our regret will impact the level of our resolve. So these two, regret and resolve, are very much interrelated. So that brings us to the middle scope, which is what we're looking at today. And so these are stages of the path shared. They're not done in isolation, but we can, as a bodhisattva vehicle, the great stages of the path, we can bring in our bodhicitta and our mind training and our six perfections and all of these sorts of things, which are great scope. And even the tantra level as post, graduate studies, we can bring them all in as we progress through these stages. And so these stages are shared. The small and the middling scope are shared with the person who's seeking the great scope goals of enlightenment. All right, so you've seen this before. We've looked at these lower scopes and how they're junior school. We saw the 3 preliminary contemplations right back in module 1, beginningless mind, nature of mind, Buddha nature. Would have touched on just the notion only of spiritual mentor or the guru or guru devotion and precious human rebirth. So we've covered all of that. And the middle scope is where we're going to focus today. And this is like entering into high school. So in dependence on everything we've covered, we keep going with these new insights. And we're going to look at the beginning of the Four Noble Truths, particularly focusing on true suffering and true origins. And an elaboration of the Four Truths is going into the detail of the 12 links. And so we won't have an opportunity to go through the 12 links of dependent origination. We'll stick to the abbreviated aspect, which is the Four Noble Truths. And then we'll look at the 3 higher trainings. And so this is where we're wanting to go today. Now, remember, every week we're doing homework, we're writing notes, particularly in reflection after we've done the session, on how each stage, whether it be the lower, middling, or great, how each stage is causing an increase into our happiness. And we're also looking at the quote that we looked at before of the Buddha's quote about overcoming negativities, not engaging in non-virtuous actions, engaging in virtuous actions, subduing the mind, that sort of thing. So how are each of these stages helping us to understand that quote and to be able to apply that quote to the various stages of the path? So that's what we're doing today. So I want to start with the 3 high trainings, then go into the 4 truths. And so we'll look at the great scope in the subsequent weeks. Okay, so all of this is based on the fact that in Buddhism, there is the assertion of past and future lives. So the fact that if we can come to realize or develop a correct assumption or even just doubt tending towards the fact that past and future lives do exist, then this will serve us very well, because what we're doing here is relying on the fact that there are future lifetimes. And so no longer are we going to be satisfied with the goal of the small scope, which was simply to have a good fortunate rebirth in samsara, which is what we have now, and we still suffer, don't we? So we know, which is why we're giving up, our time and energy to be here when we could be doing 100 other things. We see the importance because we know that we're suffering. We know that things can be better. And so we're keen seekers of the spiritual practice here. And so no longer satisfied with simply having a good fortunate rebirth in samsara, but the middling scope practitioner and us with the great scope mindset, sharing the stages of the middle scope. What we need to develop a wish to avoid. I know some people don't like that word fear, so you could say a wish to avoid. What do we wish to avoid is any rebirth in samsara, not just the lower realms, but even the upper realms. And so this is what we wish to avoid. So we need to generate some sort of apprehension about ongoing suffering in samsara. That's the intelligent fear or healthy fear, that sort of mindset. So how do we not take rebirth in samsara? We need a strong method, a very vast method of renunciation. And so I'm going to talk about renunciation more at the end, and also probably next week as well in more detail. And the 3 higher trainings: ethics, concentration, wisdom. So these are our main methods here that we adopt. the wisdom you can look at from the 3 higher trainings, you can extrapolate that out into looking at it individually here as the wisdom realizing emptiness of what? Of inherent existence. There are many types of wisdom, but the wisdom we're focusing on, which we need if we're going to get out of samsara to liberation or beyond that to enlightenment, whatever those goals are, both can only come about in dependence on wisdom realizing emptiness. Wisdom realizing emptiness with renunciation will lead to liberation. Wisdom realizing emptiness with bodhicitta will lead to enlightenment. So the methods are different. Renunciation or bodhicitta, the wish to be free of our own suffering and its causes, which is in essence renunciation, or the wish to free all living beings from all of their suffering and bring them to highest enlightenment, bodhicitta. So whether it's renunciation or bodhicitta as methods, we need the accompanying wisdom to reach that goal. And so the goal here is liberation for the middling scope. Certainly in the great scope, it's going to be enlightenment, but we do need to abandon karma and afflictions. We do need to abandon afflictive obscurations, because that's what hinders our liberation. So even if we're focused on enlightenment, we still need to abandon these elements. All right. So then Lama Atisha said, in regard to the beings of the middle scope, those who seek peace, liberation, nirvana, those who seek peace for themselves alone, not for all sentient beings, but for themselves alone, turning away from worldly pleasures, so not caught up in the sensory pleasures of this one lifetime, and not caught up even within the attachments to samsara. Okay, so even with taking future rebirths and getting fortunate, happy rebirths at that, not having any attachment to anything in samsara of this lifetime or future lifetimes. So turning away from those worldly pleasures and avoiding destructive actions. So actions means karma, doesn't it? So not engaging in 10 non-virtuous actions like at the small scope, but also more than that, now focusing more on the afflictions which drive the actions and not creating those negative actions by making sure that they don't create the afflictions which cause those actions. So this is how we can apply that Buddha quote that we saw earlier. And that's only one way, there's many ways. And avoiding destructive actions are said to be of middling capacity. So this is in essence what we're looking at in the middle capacity, liberation for oneself alone. Okay? By not being satisfied with anything in samsara, seeing it all as utterly contaminated and something to be abandoned. Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say things like, I think it was in regard to the attachments in samsara, to see it as discarded or used toilet paper. Like we wouldn't have any attachment to, taking that and using it for our purpose if it's been used already and things like this. And we need to see the attachments of samsara like that, something to that effect. It was a long time ago I heard it, but that was the essence. It's like used toilet paper, something to be thrown away, discarded, thrown away, something like that anyway. So then what we can do is look at what should I do? I might do just a little bit on the 3 high trainings first, and then we'll go into the 4 noble truths, okay? So with all of this in mind, so what we want to do is develop these renunciation, which I'll talk about later in the 3 high trainings. So the 3 high trainings were ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And so I think I gave you an illustration last week. I think it was to this group where we talked about if we wanted to fell a tree and, we need a strong body or a strong arm. We need an axe, and we need to hit that tree in the same spot each time. And so this is a simple analogy for these 3 higher trainings. So the strong arm or the strong body is our ethics. That's the basis. And then in dependence on that, we can pick up that big heavy axe and at the same spot hit each time with a level of concentration, isn't it? Single point of concentration to hit the same point each time. And then the axe itself is like the wisdom realizing emptiness of inherent existence, independent existence, substantial existence, whatever you want to call it. And it's with that axe, that wisdom, that we can cut the tree, the root of our samsara. And that wisdom is the independence on the concentration. So this concentration would become abiding. The wisdom would be the special insight. And this union of the two, calm abiding and special insight, we can fell the tree, cut the root of our samsara. So to do that, we're going to need this, strong body, these strong ethics. And so the ethics of non-harmfulness we see in refuge, but even more so now, taking pratamoksha vows, individual liberation vows, taking vows of not killing, and not just abandoning the thought of killing, but actually taking a vow that you're committed day and night in each moment not to engage in killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying about having spiritual attainments, like saying, oh, I've got karma abiding, bodhicitta, and these sorts of things, when you don't actually have these things at all. So these would be some illustrations of some of the vows you can take of individual liberation. So when we take these vows, then our mind becomes very strong, very determined, okay? So you can see why it's that strong body or that strong arm of ethics. What else? So with ethics, on the basis of ethics, concentration, on the basis of concentration, wisdom. So ethics is the basis of all of this, all basis of all good qualities and so forth. The ethics will have I guess, a function of weakening the afflictions. You know what it's like when we do misbehave and we don't have good ethics at the time. Have you ever tried to actually sit down and do meditation after that? Even just the next day or later that night, it's quite impossible because the mind is so disturbed, so agitated by the afflictions. And so it's very choppy, the water, very agitated and disturbed. And so we cannot bring about concentration. So if our ethics aren't good, very difficult to concentrate. And so having these vows and so forth, individual liberation vows and abiding in non-harmfulness is a way of training to develop the basis by which we can develop concentration. And as you saw in module 2, how to meditate, that stabilizing or placement meditation, eventually we can make it become calm abiding. And the analytical meditation in the nature of wisdom, we can eventually make it become special insight, and then the union of the two, calm abiding, special insight. Then we've got a really powerful antidote to overcome the afflictions. So the ethics will weaken the afflictions. The concentration, when we develop things like calm abiding and so forth, they will suppress the afflictions, okay? But they haven't overcome them. And so it's not enough. Calm abiding alone is not enough. So we want to weaken and suppress the afflictions, but it's only with this wisdom that we can eradicate the afflictions, totally abandon them forever. So that's in essence a little bit on the 3 higher trainings and how they are very important for all of us in wanting to develop spiritual attainments. So, all right, so let's have a look. I've got where is this thing here? There it is. So we'll just go in to share again a portion of the screen. Okay, so if I may talk a little bit about the Four Noble Truths. So all of these topics that we're covering, the Four Noble Truths, the 12 links of dependent origination, all of these are topics in themselves that we could do 6 weeks on. And so we can only get a little glimmer at what we're doing here in module 3, presenting the path. And doing a 10-day Kopan course, for instance, 10-day Lam Rim course, we can go into much more detail. Otherwise, doing topics in much more detail on your own. There'll be, topics, courses available and so forth on the three principal aspects, on the Four Noble Truths, on the 12 links, and all of those other elements. So we'll look a little bit at the Four Noble Truths just in a brief detail. It was the first teaching given by the Buddha. I think it was at Deer Park. So first turning of the wheel. And these four truths are as realized by a superior being, a noble being, not an ordinary being, but someone who has non-conceptually realized emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, they have that perceptual or non-conceptual realization of emptiness. That's what makes them a noble being, an Arya being, a superior being. So these are four truths realized by that type of being. All right. So here's just a graphic I created for the 12 links, starting with ignorance, compositional factors, consciousness, etc. We won't have time to go through them, but it's the way I see it is like we're circling in samsara and we're so attracted to samsara. So it's like being on a Ferris wheel, This is wrong thinking, by the way, but it was Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo. And she talked about how we just want to feel cozy in samsara. So even in Dharma centers, sincere people like ourselves, how no matter how sincere we are, our thinking is still quite off target, because it's almost like, we're happy in samsara. As long as there's not too much suffering and we can focus on, doing our Dharma things in our prayers and meditations and these sorts of things, doing Kora and all of that, then, we're content. And the analogy she gave was, it's like we're just trying to make ourselves more comfortable in this prism. And she talked about if we painted the walls like a pale green and put up some paintings, then, we're just trying to make our prison cell more comfortable. But what we need to be doing is getting out of the prison. So, yeah, so that was a thought like that came up. So these Four Noble Truths are really coming down to an entire framework for the Buddha's teachings. And this is all very fundamental framework. So whether a great scope, middling scope, it's all shared. And what the Four Noble Truths are really getting at is like recognizing, like, help, I'm suffering. Why do I suffer, right? What are the causes of my suffering? And then, can I ever be free of this suffering? Can I be free of the causes of those sufferings? And then how do I do that? So this is in essence the Four Noble Truths. We're talking about true suffering, help, recognizing that we have difficulties and challenges and we're suffering, and what can we do about it? We've got an illness, and it's more than a chronic illness, it's perpetual while we're in samsara. And so this illness is our true suffering, our situation. Why do I suffer? Why do I have this illness? Why am I experiencing all these various sufferings? This is our true origins or true causes of suffering. And the causes of suffering are karma and afflictions. Twofold. So why do I suffer? Like, because of karma and afflictions. So can I ever be free of karma and afflictions? Can I be free of true origins and what they produce, true suffering? Can I ever get healthy? I know I suffer, I've got an illness, I know what's caused it, but can I be free of that? Can I get healthy and well? So that's looking at the true cessation, the third noble truth. And then how do I attain good health? How do I get there? I've got to take the medicine, the true paths. This is the remedy or the cure for getting healthy. So having when we're sick is when we go to the doctor. So that's why we've got the very first step is the illness. We need to recognize that we're suffering. We don't go to the doctor when we're feeling fabulous and healthy. We go to the doctor, and quite often the first question we might say is, why am I experiencing this? Like, what's caused this? Because we want to make sure we don't encounter those causes again. We want to stop being sick and suffering, so we don't want to encounter the causes that created that condition. So, why am I suffering? And then the doctor gives us all this amazing advice and prescribes this medicine. And, leaving it on the shelf or by the bedside table is not enough. We actually have to ingest it, embody that medicine, not just know what's all the elements of the medicine. It's not some intellectual trip, but we have to certainly digest and embody that and take it regularly. And one dose will not be enough to cure our situation, particularly when it's chronic, but this ongoing course. And so once we engage in taking that medicine on a regular basis, exactly according to the prescription, then we will actually be free of suffering. So this is the Four Noble Truths elaborated. We've got things like ignorance. We've got things like craving and grasping. So these are the afflictions. Karma and afflictions, remember, are the true causes. So here's the afflictions: ignorance, craving, and grasping. Links 1, 8, and 9 are afflictions. 2 and 10 are karma. So when we have ignorance, so we then create actions. So this is a compositional actions here. And at the time of death, we will ripen that particular type of karmic seed at this point, number 10, and it will be what gets nourished and throws us into a future rebirth where we experience aging and death, and we take a new body and our consciousness enters that body and so forth. Okay, so we're not going to go through the 12 links because we don't have time, but just know that karma and afflictions are highlighted there: 1, 8, 9, 2, and 10. These are the true causes of suffering, and these are the true sufferings, having a body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions, and so forth. There's the mental factor of feeling you learned in module 1, okay? How we're always with feeling. It was one of those omnipresent ones. So yeah, this is a picture that's outside every gompa, so pay attention to it. It's usually I've only extracted the middle part there, but it's like the Lord of Death. We can have a look at that picture later. The Wheel of Life, this is called, and the Lord of Death has got in the claws this wheel. And so these are the 12 links going around there: ignorance, compositional factors, and so forth. And these are the realms of existence. Sometimes this is divided into 2. Here it's 1. So we've got the God realm and the demigod realm, and they're always fighting amongst themselves. And then the human realm, and then the animal realm, hungry ghost realm, and then the hell realms. So that's basically those 12 links, and it's teaching us how we enter into samsara under the power of karma and afflictions. Links, what was it, 1, 8, 9, 2, and 10, and how they cause true sufferings, that we take this body and mind that we have has been projected by karma that ripened at the previous lifetime. So at the time of death. So we have this body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions. This is an illustration of our samsara. Samsara is always something within our own continuum. So this is samsara, this body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions. That's what we're wanting to abandon. We want to abandon this continual cycle of rebirth under the control of karma and afflictions. That's our samsara. So it's not something external out there. It's not like some sort of world, it's in our own continuum, which means that we have the power to overcome it. So how do we overcome it is with the other 2 truths. That's what's going to reverse or undo our circling in samsara. How do we do that? To become liberated from samsara, where we've broken that continuity of rebirth under karma and afflictions, to be liberated from that, to undo that, to achieve nirvana, liberation, true cessation, then we need to develop, for instance, the true path of the wisdom realizing emptiness of inherent existence. But that alone is not enough. We need renunciation. We need bodhicitta, these sorts of things. All the ethics and everything in our continuum in that virtue will become our paths when qualified by renunciation, which is directed at turning our back on samsara and achieving liberation. So that's in essence the Four Noble Truths. Now, one of the beauties, actually, before we go into that, I'll look a little bit at a bit more detail on true suffering. So sometimes when we hear suffering, we have aversion to it. So maybe if you want, we can use the chat for good purposes in our Zoom session. So if you want, just flood the chat with maybe single word answers or something of what you think of when you hear the word suffering. So just like brainstorm, type enter, and go for it. Let's see if we can get what people's thoughts are around the term suffering. What are your thoughts? What comes to mind when you hear the word suffering? So we've got words like sadness and pain. Keep going. Give it all you got. Sadness and pain, anguish, mental illness, mental agitation, loneliness, misery, unavoidable. These are excellent words. Parenting conflicts, unsatisfaction, homelessness, avoidance. Absolutely. This is excellent, guys. Well done. Beautiful illustrations. Never satisfied. Famine, mental, physical, emotional disturbances, imbalances, war, grasping. You see how the list goes on. So thank you so much for contributing in that way. It's excellent. Death. This is exactly right. So all of these, it's no wonder when we hear the word suffering that it can be depressing, heavy. We can have that aversion. We just want to turn away. Life is already suffering enough. Why do we have to talk about it? Why do we have to think about it? Why do we have to meditate on it? You know, people are suffering so much in their life, ourselves, and every time we turn on social media or the news and things like this, we see it in our faces, and we see and are ourselves alone and pained and experiencing all of this. So if the Buddha has taught this true suffering and stopped there, it would make absolutely no sense whatsoever to even think about suffering. But as you saw, the Buddha didn't stop there. So right after teaching about the true suffering, we looked at the true causes. Why do I suffer? What's causing me to suffer? And the Buddha taught on karma and afflictions being the cause. So if I can encourage that we hang in there with this, Buddha Dharma is often quite opposite to our way of thinking. So if we hang in there with being brave and courageous to bear learning about suffering and reading about it in your homework exercises and these sorts of things to strengthen your understanding of this class, do engage in that. When you watch the news, have your mala. You know, when you're watching anything on social media, have your mala, and you just generate compassion and so forth, because there's so much suffering in this world. And so, you know, if we can try to not shy away from all of that suffering, but instead use it as fuel for practice. So we saw all that with suffering, and what we saw with the various types of illustrations of suffering that everyone was contributing, this is all the in-your-face suffering. It's obvious suffering to us. It's the suffering of pain, bringing that sense of misery, okay? And what we very rarely think about, though, is because sometimes maybe we just stop there, right? And we think, oh, suffering, and we get all, you know, depressed about it or unmotivated to investigate any further. We might even get, you know, paralyzed in the heaviness and fear of our pain. But we don't go to that next level. So even even an ant wants to be free of the suffering of pain. And even particular non-Buddhists who engage in concentration meditations and absorptions, they also want to be free of the suffering of change. Suffering of change is what we call happiness. So in the Buddhist teachings, it tells us how it's only temporary happiness. Okay, so temporary happiness is also suffering from a Buddhist point of view. And even non-Buddhists want to be free of that. And I'll elaborate on what that means. But just to add, here in the middle scope, we're wanting to be free of something even more subtle than suffering of change, which is already quite subtle compared to suffering of pain, that obvious suffering that we're experiencing. All right, so remember, suffering of pain, suffering of change, and even more subtle, pervasive suffering of conditionality. That goes by many different names, but that'll do for now. So then with the sufferings, there are 3, 6, and 8 different types of suffering. We won't go through them all because we won't have that leisure. But some people mentioned in the chat, for instance, dissatisfaction was one of them. Maybe someone mentioned something like uncertainty or something like this. These are very much getting at those 2 types of suffering that are illustrating the 6 types. The 3 I've just elaborated on, the suffering of pain, change, and pervasive suffering of conditionality. And then we can elaborate even more to look at 8 different types of suffering. We can look at individual sufferings within realms, suffering of samsara in general, that sort of thing. But there's a really good analogy that I first learned from Sangikajra and then just elaborated over the years. And she likened these 3 sufferings to being in prison, which is a great analogy for samsara, right? And she talked about how, like, being in prison with all the walls and the bars all around you and not being, you know, free to leave. This is like how we are chained in samsara under the control of karma and afflictions. You can think of even being shackled and chained and bring in karma and afflictions to that. And so she talked about the 3 sufferings and, you know, all the terrible experiences we have in prison. So, you know, whether it's getting beaten or shanked in the shower and these sorts of things, all of those sufferings of pain, the isolation, separation from our loved ones and family, you know, all of that pain and anguish that the prisoner would be experiencing, missing their loved ones and so forth. So these are all the suffering of suffering or the suffering of pain. But then it's not all painful for that prisoner. For instance, they might get a visit from their loved ones, or they might get a phone call or a conjugal visit or something like this. So there can be experiences that have that temporary happiness for them. Maybe it's working out, doing the exercise, yeah, whatever that yard's called, you know, when they go out into the yard and do their basketball and these sorts of things. So there's some temporary pleasure for them, temporary happiness. That's like the suffering of change. But as you know, that suffering of change doesn't last. And it's only a matter of time before that suffering of change, that temporary happiness lessens and the suffering of pain becomes manifest. And when the suffering of pain lessens, the temporary pleasure increases. So it's like a seesaw. The way I think of it, it's like a seesaw. When the suffering of pain lessens, the suffering of change is growing. And then when the suffering of change is diminishing, the suffering of pain is rearing its head. And I'll finish the analogy and then I'll give another example too. So then the pervasive suffering of conditionality, when applied to the analogy of being in prison, would be, for instance, where you're pervaded by suffering. So you cannot leave the prison walls, that precinct. You're not free. You're totally confined. There's no escape. There's no freedom. And that's like the pervasive suffering of conditionality, where you're locked in to, in this case, if we apply the meaning, locked into samsara, okay? Without any freedom, under the control of karma and afflictions, so that at any given moment, we will experience suffering of pain or suffering of change. And we'll often oscillate between these two throughout a day. So if you think about it, like, for instance, I love going to the beach and I love seeing the dogs at the beach and just the blue sky, blue water, and beautiful light-colored sand. It's my happy place to go and relax and go for a nice big walk. And but even that, like I get bored. My whole life I've been bored laying on the beach, just to suntan or something. I 45 minutes and I'm done. I'm over it. So, the joy of laying on the sand, obviously with a towel underneath, otherwise you'd be suffering of pain, and basking in the sun. Sure, there's some pleasure, some joy, but how long before that pleasure decreases and the suffering increases? So what was once feeling quite pleasurable, the warmth on our bodies and sunning ourselves, certainly boredom starts to settle in. We start to get increasingly hot, and so this pleasure is going down, and the suffering of being hot and sticky and just like bored as well, we're just increasing. That pleasure of pain has now become more obvious to us. So what do? We go into the surf and we splash around and get cooled off and all of that sort of stuff. But before long, the pleasure of being in the water has now diminished and we're getting cold. The suffering of pain is increasing. We're getting cold. We're over being wet. We just want to get out. We're bored again. And so what do? We go back and lay in the sun. And it's like this throughout our day, constantly going between these two different types of suffering of pain and suffering of change. The law of diminishing returns, economics. I studied accounting and things, but not so much economics. So I'm not sure. So that was just illustrating these different types of sufferings, that the suffering of change arises when there's a relief of suffering. The suffering of pain has diminished. Okay, so it's good to get a picture of that in your mind and see how you're oscillating between these two throughout the day. Why are you oscillating between the two? Because you've got the third suffering, the pervasive suffering of conditionality, which is in any moment giving rise to suffering of pain or change. As you know, sad fact, I think it was in America, USA, something like there's a death every 11 seconds or something. As we know, life changes in a moment, in a heartbeat, in a breath, an absence of a breath. Like life changes that dramatically because of being under the control of this pervasive suffering of conditionality, the third suffering. So we like pleasure. Does that mean that we can't enjoy temporary pleasures? And it's not saying that. We do need happiness. We need temporary happiness. We need temporary pleasures. We need to be able to enjoy ourselves and not be all miserable, because otherwise we're just indulging the suffering of pain. So we do need these temporary pleasures. The problem is not in the objects. The problem is not having a computer, having a phone, having coffee, and all the different pleasures we have, our loved ones, our family, our connections, our friendships. The problem is not in the objects. The problem is internal, and it's in our own mind, and it's when we grasp and cling on to and suffocate the life out of some of these things, our relationships and so forth, the stronger the attachment. So it's not that we don't need samsaric happiness and pleasure. We just don't need to be attached to it. And this is the difficulty. It's the attachment that we want to give up. The attachment is our obstacle to seeking a happiness that is higher and lasting, and an ultimate happiness of liberation or enlightenment. While we're seduced by these temporary pleasures, having attachment to them, clinging and craving for them in each moment, we will never even consider that there is a higher happiness. That's the problem, the attachment. Okay, so it's a big obstacle, massive obstacle if we ever want to get out of samsara. All right, so therefore, that's probably enough for now. Now, I did have this little charty sort of thing, because this is really inspiring to me, and I'm not sure it will be to you, so apologies in advance. When we look at our suffering, because we have to investigate our suffering, we have to analyze our suffering, we have to meditate on suffering. And when we look at our suffering, and the Buddha said, understand suffering, understand the illness, this true suffering. Well, is that suffering with a cause, or is there no cause for it? Is there a cause that I have created somehow, or is there no cause at all? If it's causeless, without any cause, then there's nothing we can do about it. We will just forever suffer. Nothing we can do. So we just end there, right? But that's not the Buddhist teachings. The Buddhist teachings is saying this suffering does have a cause. And so is that cause impermanent and changing moment by moment, depending on causes and conditions? Or is it permanent and it's not changing? It's non-momentary. It's not changing. Like, for instance, it's just always like that. If it was permanent and never changing moment by moment, then we could not counteract it. We could never counteract the cause if it was permanent, not changing, not depending on causes and conditions. We would always experience suffering because the cause of suffering cannot be changed. Okay? If it's not permanent, because we know that our suffering is sometimes more manifest, other times less manifest, more intense, less intense. Sometimes it's like we're not suffering at all with suffering of pain, and we're experiencing this temporary happiness, suffering of change. And so because we know through our own experience that our suffering is constantly changing like this, we can know that the cause of that suffering also is constantly changing momentarily. And so therefore, because our cause of suffering is impermanent, we can do something about it. And this is something we have to hold single-pointedly in our meditation to develop a strong resolve that we can overcome our suffering. We don't need to suffer. We are creating causes of suffering, karma and afflictions. In particular, chief is the ignorance grasping at inherent existence, our self, our body, our mind, all phenomena. From this ignorance grasping at inherent existence, we give rise to all sorts of afflictions, which I'll look at in a bit more detail later on. And then we create actions or karma, what we say, do, and think, and then we create our suffering, samsara. So all of this can come completely undone, knowing that the causes of our suffering are impermanent and rely on causes and conditions. Therefore, if we change the causes and conditions, we change it producing its result. It won't produce a suffering result anymore. It'll undo our samsara. Instead of creating more true suffering, we'll undo it with developing eventually true paths, taking that medicine and achieving the result of liberation. So, okay, so then with this is now from a great vehicle, the great scope. It talks about mind training things in Bodhisattva's way of life. Shantideva is just like utterly supreme, one of the Nalanda masters, 17 Nalanda masters. He says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? So we can bring in some mind training when we're engaging in this stages of the path shared in common with the middle scope. We can bring in some of the great scope thinking about mind training and so forth, and bodhicitta and all the rest. So if there's something we can do about a situation, if it can be remedied, what is the use of all the conceptualization that goes on in our mind, making worse the problem? Instead of facing the problem, which is maybe 10% of the problem, we decorate, exaggerate, we create so many more fears and worries with our thinking, our distortions, our catastrophizing, that our 10% problem has got massive in front of us, right? So what is the point of being unhappy about a situation if we can change it? Instead of putting all that energy into the conceptualization and fears and worries, do something about it, face it, overcome it. And if there's something that we cannot solve, we cannot change it, then what is the use of all of this conceptualization and fear and worry and so forth? Why create our own mental unhappiness and give fuel to anger and so forth through getting unhappy about a situation we cannot change? So this is one very good verse to memorize and take a screenshot of or something, memorize it, or just refer to Shantideva chapter 6, verse 10. The other one that is very, very precious, there's so many precious verses, and we won't have time to go through this in great detail, but this verse really needs an entire lesson on its own. But to give you some essence of it, at least, Shantideva beautifully says, furthermore, suffering has good qualities. So instead of thinking of it as something horrible, negative, to be discarded, and all the things we put in the chat, right? If we can change our way of viewing suffering, Rinpoche, I think, used to say we should like suffering like something like licking ice cream or something like this, to see it as something, delicious that we want to get into. Because if we can recognize our suffering and see that it's caused and wish to overcome those causes, we can reverse samsara and achieve liberation. So reflecting on suffering has, amazing results if we can follow the path. So suffering has good qualities. So what are those good qualities that can help shift our mind to see the benefits of suffering? Well, through being disheartened with it. I think that's getting more at renunciation, this mind of turning our back on samsara and going towards liberation or enlightenment. So through being disheartened and so sick of our suffering, we'll seek to, like when we go to the doctor, we'll seek, what is the cause? Why am I experiencing this? What can I do about it? Can I overcome this? How do I do that? We'll start to investigate some of the Four Noble Truths through being disheartened with our suffering. All right. So then arrogance. It's really hard to be so full of pride and arrogance when we're suffering. So, we quite often think that I don't need people, I'm independent, I've got this covered. We don't necessarily make ourselves vulnerable and share. We might be there for everyone else, our friends, but how much do we make ourselves vulnerable when we need help and disclose what's going on? Or do we put on a front that everything's okay and I'm okay? See, when we're suffering, it's very hard to maintain that facade of the pride and arrogance. And, it makes us dependent, and we need to be comfortable and we need to embrace the notion of dependence, that we are dependent on others. I can remember I got really sick for about 1.5 years, and I had many bouts of shingles and post-nerve damage that, was the killer. And it sort of lasted about 1.5 years. And from being independent and, capable, able, strong body, this sort of thing, I couldn't even peel a potato. And I live on a hill and I couldn't even walk up and down a hill. But luckily someone had given us a golf buggy at that time before we blew it up on the steep hill, but we could use a golf buggy. But I became totally dependent on receiving the kindness of others. Someone came and did my washing for me, which is quite embarrassing, and taking out my rubbish and this sort of thing. And it's so wonderful because I got to break down the independence, the wrong conception, and see how we are all dependent on each other for our basic needs at times, certainly for our happiness and our long-term goals. But also it was such a beautiful experience because say some things weren't done. I think like the rubbish wasn't taken out. That was one of the things. And so I noticed that would be really helpful, but I don't think I would have asked for help in that regard initially. But it made me see how I can help others when they're suffering and needing help. So it was really an awesome experience to see that popping in on someone and doing their dishes, taking them a meal, emptying their bins, offering to change their sheets and make their bed fresh. Just simple things that when you're sick and suffering are insurmountable, but when we're healthy and strong, we just take for granted. So suffering has so many good qualities that we can really increase our connection with others. The more we are suffering with something, the more our compassion for others arises. So for me, having had that shingles, I couldn't bear the thought of elderly people getting shingles because I'd never used the word excruciating to describe pain before. And also, I understood the meaning of writhing in pain. These were two words, writhing in pain and excruciating. So I understood the severity of that manifest pain, and therefore transferred that to others. And I couldn't bear the thought of an elderly person, a vulnerable person experiencing something like that. So the level of compassion we have for others grows through our own suffering. Okay. And then we know from a Buddhist point of view that why am I suffering? It's a result. Okay, so it's a result of what? A cause I've created, karma, right? We never experience something we haven't created. And karma doesn't go to waste. So it could have been something we created a long time ago, but now we're experiencing the suffering result. And what gives rise to suffering? Non-virtue. So I've engaged in negative actions in the past, and now it's ripening. So if I don't like this suffering, I need to do two things. One, purify past karma so it doesn't continue to ripen. And I need to stop creating new negative karma. Okay? So through suffering, we come to these good understandings. And then because we see that negativities are something to be shunned, the opposite of that would be creating the virtue. And so we delight, we take joy in creating causes of happiness. So this is also a really beautiful verse that I think has so much meaning to do meditation on and really, yeah, really get it in our heart. I think it can very much help. So that's enough for suffering for now. So then the true origins, the true causes of suffering are our afflictions. So whether it be our ignorance, our attachment, our anger, and all the derivatives. So you saw that in mind and its potential, all the non-virtuous mental factors, right? The afflicted mental factors, we looked at that. And whether it be our jealousy, our pride, or whatever it is, all of these afflictions are creating, driving actions, negative actions, even virtuous actions. Out of attachment, we can do something. Out of attachment to a good reputation, we can give to someone who's homeless. We might even film it and post it on Facebook. A so-called good action becomes completely contaminated by our afflictions and will produce only results for samsara. Unless we have renunciation or bodhicitta motivation, we will only be creating those causes from samsara instead of, for enlightenment, a very virtuous motivation, making offering, or not offering, but making a giving to somebody who's homeless and so forth, in need, anyone in need, if we have the resources. So these wrong conceptions, they narrow our mind, they make our thinking very dark and heavy and exaggerate the problems. And this is what's causing us so much trouble in our existence. So I like this graphic. I hope you do too. So I just think that's something kind of nice and you can relate to, when we, sometimes I love being in a plane because we can look down from the sky and we can see, not long after we've taken off, everyone so busy scurrying around, shopping trolleys at shopping centers and cars getting from A to B. But as we're getting higher and higher, it's like we're zooming out and seeing what is so, for that one person, such a massive, intensive, experience, maybe stuck in traffic for 5 hours or whatever they're doing. But when we zoom out, it just seems so insignificant by comparison. So it's getting that vast perspective. And so these wrong conceptions of what narrow our thinking, and this is what makes our suffering so much more intense unnecessarily. And if we can learn to give up these wrong conceptions, our wrong views and all our hopes and expectations and wishes for how something ought to be, and our misunderstandings, misinterpretations, all our projections, storylines, fantasies, all of that sort of thing, if we can give up all of that and instead of being reactive, develop a vast mind of renunciation, then we can really start to overcome the true causes of our suffering, karma, and afflictions. So let's look at that. Identifying the true causes of suffering. So this is how delusions or afflictions arise and pollute the mind. Remember the nature of the mind, that which is clear and knowing at a conventional level and at an ultimate level lacks inherent existence. These are covered with all the afflicted mental factors, ignorance, attachment, and anger, and so forth, but they haven't entered into the very nature of our mind. And so while they pollute our mind, they can be removed with a powerful antidote, just like the water, all messed up and muddy and sediment everywhere. When it starts to settle, it can even be purified, and we see this, with purification tablets or whatever, some sort of powerful antidote. We can then even drink that water. So we can drink the nectar of the Dharma because the negativities, our non-virtuous states of mind and so forth, haven't entered into the nature. And so they can be removed. They're adventitious. They can be removed with a powerful antidote. So how do we give rise to all of these delusions? And that is through these afflicted mental factors. The chief affliction, so karma and afflictions are our true origins. The most important of that is afflictions. And the most important of the afflictions is this chief affliction grasping at inherent existence, that ignorance grasping at an independent existence, concrete existence. All right, so independence on that, so grasping at an I to inherently exist, me and my, whatever's mine, my loved ones, my body, my mind, my way of thinking, my view of the world. When we grasp on and cling on to that very tightly, concretizing everything, then in dependence on that, we create attachment, aversion, and all the other afflictions. So remember, the afflictions is one part of true origins. In dependence on having these, this attachment and craving and desire and aversion and jealousy and pride and all of the rest, then what do? We say and do things physically. What we do, say, and think become actions driven by those afflictions, which is created by grasping at an inherently existent self or phenomenon. So karma means action. We engage in actions of body, speech, and mind. This is how we cause true suffering. This is how we again and again circle in samsara. So the greatest suffering is suffering of cyclic existence, going round and round and round, continually creating new rounds of that Ferris wheel, new rounds of cyclic existence. As soon as we're giving rise to ignorance and craving and attachment and all of these things, we're giving rise to new actions which will perpetuate our samsara. So when we see that the causes of suffering, karma and afflictions, true origins, these can be stopped or eliminated, then they won't be able to produce the result suffering in samsara. And when we see that these causes can be eliminated, then we're going to want to strive for something higher than the temporary happiness we satisfy ourselves with now. We're going to want to strive for ultimate happiness, unchanging happiness, a state which is forever free of karma and afflictions that produce suffering, a state which is free forever from any suffering and is only in a state of happiness, no longer contaminated, where it's temporary, subject to karma and afflictions, but an ultimate happiness, a lasting happiness. So if we can see that causes of suffering can be eliminated, how is that so? Well, if we can overcome this ignorance grasping at inherent existence with a powerful antidote, the opposite of that, our wisdom that's based in reasons and logic, that is correct and valid, then what we can do is we can overcome that ignorance. And the way ignorance sees is things as inherently existent. The way wisdom sees as the opposite of that, lacking inherent existence, empty of inherent existence. So this is exactly opposite. This is saying, ignorance is saying things inherently exist. Wisdom saying they don't inherently exist at all. They're empty of inherent existence. So this powerful mind of wisdom, realizing emptiness, can devour the ignorance and abandon everything that follows from it, which is all of our afflictions, all of our negative karmas, and the suffering produced in dependence on that. That's why if we overcome this root of samsara, everything unravels that is related to samsara, suffering and its causes, true origins. So I've talked a little bit about karma and afflictions and how these afflictions or delusions or disturbing emotions are the chief cause of our samsara. Now, afflictions is probably a really good word for it, but you can call it maybe delusions as a second better word, but disturbing emotions, not so sure I like that translation. So with these afflictions and disturbing emotions or delusions, they do disturb the mind. You know, think of the sediment in the bottom of the clear water, and it's all agitated and disturbed. You sit down to try to meditate and concentrate on even your breath, and you're so utterly distracted by that you cannot. So we're so agitated and disturbed. And Damien, I'll get to your question soon. I've almost finished. So the mind is unpeaceful, it's agitated. These delusions disturb the mind, okay? And they don't accord with reality, which is why they can be overcome. Ignorance grasping at things to have independent existence does not accord with the reality of things existing dependently. And therefore, this wisdom that realizes the emptiness of inherent existence is able to overcome that, because this mind accords with reality. Things are dependently arisen. Things are empty of inherent existence. These two things have the same meaning: dependent arising and emptiness. Okay, so they don't accord with reality. We cannot reason properly. Whatever reasons we come up with won't be valid. They will be just wrong consciousnesses, for instance. And these disturbing emotions cause our suffering. They motivate our actions, motivate our karma. They are not innate part of the mind. They have not entered into the nature of the mind. Therefore, they can be removed. They're not permanent. No matter what your situation, it is impermanent. It's not lasting. And so all of our conceptualizations, wrong stories we tell ourselves, make out as if it's a permanent situation. It's always going to be like that. This is nonsense. It's not the case. And so they are adventitious and can be removed. So this slide, it would be good for you to get a copy of that, because I know some of you are doing exams and things like that. You do need to understand about delusions and disturbing emotions and things like that. So I want to go to a question, because I think Damien's got a question, and then I will maybe just Damien, if I can just mention firstly, with these true origins, something that we do need to recognize is what are the three main afflictions? And so I assume you've already learnt that in Mind in Its Potential, because you would have covered things like attachment, anger, and ignorance. So is that true? You've covered all of that already? Yep, good, thumbs up and everything. So Damien, I'd like to be able to answer your question if I may. Where are you? I've just got to find you on the screen. You're not on the first screen for me. Let me just go into gallery. Where are you, my friend?
Hello.
Hey, hey, Damien, what you got for me?
Um, Thanks. And you did touch on this on that last slide, but my question was if I was hoping that you could go a little bit deeper into the logic of emptiness, breaking the inherent existent
Yeah,
affliction.
cool. Are you going to be coming to subsequent sessions?
Yes.
Good, because I do plan on spending more time on that when we get to this week. We've covered true origins, how they cause true suffering. And next week, I want to get to true paths, how they bring about true cessations. And the main true path is that wisdom realizing emptiness. So I want to elaborate more on that. And I want to look more at bodhicitta as well. But I also, if we get a chance, this session we'll look at renunciation. Otherwise, I'll look at renunciation next session as well. So would you mind, Damien, if we held that over till then? Or if you have a very specific question, you're very welcome to say, well, what is the specific on this? So
No, that's
yeah.
fine. I'll happily wait. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Damien. Are there some other questions that some people have from what we've covered so far specifically? Something that might not be clear, Dana?
Yeah, it's sort of on the lines of Damien's question, but I think it's more about when you talk about dependent horizon and inherent existence, are we thinking about that in the small scope or is that the medium scope?
We're in
Because
the
it's sort of,
medium. Yeah.
okay.
So, and we're bringing the medium as a shared experience because we, like most of us in the FPMT have more ambition set on enlightenment for all sentient beings, right? Bodhicitta
Mhm.
motivations. So we share the paths of the medium scope, the middling scope. We do need the Four Noble Truths to undo our samsara and so forth. So we can, in different levels of philosophy, I don't know if you studied tenets. Have you studied tenets?
Yeah.
So there's different levels of philosophical view. And, sometimes people get scared of even the term emptiness. And I'll look at that next week, how some of the misconceptions, like we did with suffering, I'll look at some of the misconceptions around emptiness next week when we go into more detail, Dana. But, for some people, they get scared and they can get wrong thinking and they fall into these views thinking nothing exists at all, which is called nihilism. And this is not the meaning of emptiness at all. So emptiness is, do you notice I always qualify it and I say emptiness of, and I say independent existence or inherent existence. So
Right.
we're not saying things don't exist because like Dana, can you just wave your hand so I can see you in the screen? Can you just wave your hand? See how you function, Dana? I asked you a question, can you wave your hand? And you functioned as Dana and you waved your hand. So we do function and we do
Right.
respond and we do, you exist, right? And your
Right.
hand
Right.
exists to be able to wave.
Right.
So naturally we exist, but it's what we're questioning is how. How do we exist? Of course we exist and we function and people respond as our names when we're called and so forth, right? But how do we exist? Because in the small scope, we're really grasping at permanence and thinking all our
Right.
happiness is coming from external situation and all of this, everything's focused outwardly, you know? And so we start to realize that actually, no, happiness is an internal job. And if I focus on the causality that's internal of karma actions and results, I can create good actions, which will bring about good, fortunate rebirths in samsara. But going beyond that, the middle scope's more looking at the afflictions which drive the actions and wanting to overcome all of that karma that brings about a fortunate rebirth, as well as the afflictions that drive that karma. So
Right.
now with the middle scope, where you still may get people who fear the word emptiness. And so for some people in those stages, you might talk about how things do exist inherently in a findable way, that when you search for the inherently existent I, you find it. And it's let's say it's the mental consciousness. So there is a progression. And as we go through the schools, we get a more subtle understanding of things. So So that's where I've jumped us into the deep end,
Okay.
because I've taken the highest philosophical school, which is the Prasangika or middle way consequence view, and they don't assert independent existence, inherent existence, true existence, concrete existence, substantial existence, and so forth. So the meaning of emptiness is the meaning of dependent arising. Things exist. How do they exist? Dependently.
Oh, no.
If they exist dependently, that means they cannot exist independently, right? That's a dichotomy, I think you'd say. So they exist dependently. They exist in dependence on, parts, cause and effect parts being merely labeled by
Right.
the mind to give, iPhone 12, to give it a label. They exist dependently, which means they don't exist independently or inherently. So if something doesn't exist inherently, it means it's empty of inherent existence. If it's dependent, it means it's empty of inherent existence. If it's dependent, it means it's not independent. Therefore, it can't be inherently existent. It has to be empty of inherent existence. So these two have the same meaning: dependent arising and emptiness of inherent existence. And so we'll look more at this in the subsequent weeks. Is there a last question before we go to dedications?
I wondered if I missed one of the slides. I'd love to get a screenshot. It's the
Yeah, go for it.
investigating the
Oh, yeah. Let me find it for you.
reality.
Let me find it, my dear. Hang on a sec.
And then while you're finding that,
Hey,
we
darling,
might get more as we go
Camille,
along.
hang on, sweetie. What did you say? Investigating the reality. Yeah, this is just something I created. So I'm not, you could probably create a better one, but this is just something I created after studying master program. I sort of just did some things into a chart to try to make it clear for my thinking. And I found it's helpful to share it with others, but those who are mathematically inclined could probably create a better system. And if you do, send me a copy, please. So this is the one, Camille, you're referring to?
Yeah,
My
no,
friend?
and I did think it was very good, which is why I didn't get my screenshot, because I was looking at it closely. I think it's nice.
Cool. Yeah.
I also want to apologize to the group for not having my my camera on. I have an unstable connection,
Sure.
so it gets really laggy, especially if I'm trying to screenshot.
Yeah.
And I had one other question about the difference, and we may be talking about this more, so it's fine to take it later.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a subtle difference between the suffering of change
Yes.
and the suffering of the conditionality. And
Yes.
I'm not always sure I understand the difference between those two.
Yes. So just think of it like this, right? Just keep it simple for now, and then we elaborate as we need. So the suffering of change is temporary happiness. So that's what we call happiness. Does that make sense? Happiness, yeah? The suffering, pervasive suffering of conditionality is not happiness nor suffering. It's neutral. And what it is having a body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions. And so that means that at any moment, we can give rise to suffering of change or suffering of pain. I think it was Curtis Senchab Rinpoche who referred to it as like the third suffering is like a ticking time bomb. That at any moment, we can give rise to the suffering of pain or suffering of change. It's always with us, Camille. It's pervasive, whether we're in the peak of samsara, the highest fourth absorption of the formless realm, or whether we're in the lowest hell realm, it pervades all of samsara. We will never be without pervasive suffering of conditionality. But we can be without the suffering of pain if we achieve, let me think clearly. If we're in the desire realm, we have the suffering, all three sufferings. If we're in the form realm, the first, second, and third concentration, we will only have suffering of change and pervasive suffering of conditionality. We won't actually have suffering of pain. And then if we get to the fourth form realm concentration, or any of the formless realms, the formless four absorptions, I mean, any of those, there'll only be pervasive suffering of conditionality. There won't be suffering of change or suffering of pain. That's too much information, but it's just to illustrate that we won't always have suffering of pain or suffering of change, but we will always be pervaded wherever we go, from head to toe, or any realm of existence will be pervaded by the third suffering, which is having a body and mind that has been projected by karma and afflictions. So hopefully that's enough to go on for now, Camille, to give you a little bit of an understanding. Did that seem to help?
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I think we should do the dedications, because I know it's getting late for you. So if you'd like to join me, please feel free to join in, and let's do the dedications. We have created so much merit. We started with a virtuous motivation, and hopefully we've maintained virtue throughout and not given rise to too many disturbances of mind or afflictions. So hopefully we've kept our mind utterly in virtue for this period, with a sincere heart of using our life in the most meaningful way to benefit others. And so because there are limitless others that we're working for their benefit, to free them from suffering and bring them to enlightenment, we have created so much merit that even the sky could not contain it if it took form. Like it's inconceivable to us. So trusting in that for now, until we develop the realization of that, know that we've created so much merit. And this I that's created the merit, our individual selves, the action of listening and reflecting and so forth, all of this is not independent, but exists dependently on causes and conditions. And so with as much understanding as we can bring of emptiness for now, we can use emptiness and bodhicitta together to pool all of our merit with all the merit that's ever been created from all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the past and the present and in the future, into this one giant ocean of merit. And we can dedicate it to be able to actualize bodhicitta, the two aspirations for the welfare of all sentient beings, the wish to attain enlightenment. May the precious supreme bodhicitta not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. Whoops, sorry. And then we want to realize emptiness. We'll do that one as well. May the precious view of emptiness not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. And then eventually we'll get an understanding of Tantra and how we need Tantra, generation stage and completion stage, the two stages, to achieve the results that we seek. So we can dedicate the merits to realize the two stages of Tantra as well. May the precious realization of the two stages not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. And then long life prayer for His Holiness, incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. For Rinpoche's swift return, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratika Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. So thank you, everyone. Rejoice, how wonderful. What a great way to spend an hour and a half together. So I hope there was something beneficial there for you tonight. There's a question in the chat. Would I please explain the four tenets and the relation with the three scopes? I don't think I could do that. It's going to be just way, like, did you get what I meant? Way, lots of A's in there, way too complicated and difficult. And it's just going to be, yeah, not something that we can cover in this, brief introduction to the stages of the path to enlightenment. So nevertheless, I'll think about it and see if I can sprinkle in some things about it, okay? Yeah. Oh, Geshe Namduk, you know him, right? Jamyang Center. He's got a course coming up real soon on tenets. So that might be a way to explore that. We've just finished exploring the mind, which looked at a lot of what we've covered in mind and its potential. But depending on how you did it at your center, it would have maybe elaborated a bit more on that, looking at the 7 types of realizing awarenesses and so forth. But yeah, Geshe Namduk in Jamyang Center, so that'll be available online. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for turning up and committing your time and energy and inspiration, and also there'll be people who will later watch on YouTube. So thank you for being an inspiration for them as well, and making it possible for them to see it as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Isabella. Thank you, Isabella.
Enjoy your week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.